The first time I stood on that stretch of land, the wind was the only thing moving. 40 acres of dry grass, broken fence lines, and the occasional coyote track slicing through the dust. I'd inherited it from my father, who'd bought it decades earlier when the county was nothing but farms and forgotten roads. He used to say, "Land is the one thing that doesn't lie. It's always there, even when people forget who owns it." I never forgot. For years the property sat quiet. I paid the taxes, mowed the edges once in a while, and kept the paperwork locked in a safe. Deed, survey maps, every receipt. Nobody cared much about it. The nearest town was 5 miles away, and most folks passed by without realizing where the fence ended or whose name was printed on the old rusted gate. Then, one summer morning, I drove out to check the northern fence line and saw something strange: survey flags. Bright orange ones, fluttering in rows. At first I thought the county was putting in new utilities. A few days later, bulldozers rolled in. I stopped the truck on the shoulder, stepped out, and watched as men in hard hats measured and marked the ground like they owned it. "Morning," I called over the noise. One of them waved but didn't stop. Another pointed toward a sign that hadn't been there before. "Future site of Willow Creek Estates, homes starting in the $400s. That's when it hit me. They weren't just working near my land. They were standing on it. I pulled out the old survey papers and cross-checked the coordinates. There was no mistake. The bulldozers were cutting deep into the center of my property, not next to it. I spent the next week on the phone. County recorder's office, zoning department, even the sheriff's office. Nobody could explain how a developer could break ground on private land without the owner's permission. The county clerk said the land had been listed as part of Phase 3 of a residential development managed by a local homeowners association called Willow Creek HOA. "How did they get my land in that?" I asked. She clicked through her files. "According to our system, it's owned by Willow Creek Development Group." "That's impossible," I said. "I have the deed right here in my safe." "Then you might want to bring it down," she replied carefully. "Because they recorded something different." That night I barely slept. I went through every document my father left me: original deed from the 1970s, the plat maps, the tax receipts. All matched my name and my father's signature chain. The county's new records must have been wrong, or worse, altered. A few days later, I met with the developer's project manager on site. His white pickup was parked where my fence used to be. He introduced himself as Brent, smiling like a man who'd already sold 100 houses. "I think there's been a mix-up," I told him. "This land, these 40 acres, belong to me." He frowned. "Sir, we purchased this tract 2 years ago from the previous owner." "I am the previous owner," I said. He blinked. "That can't be right. Our title company cleared everything. We have recorded deeds, surveys, everything." I told him I'd like to see those deeds. He promised to have someone email them, but they never came. A week later, concrete foundations began to appear. By the end of the month, it wasn't just bulldozers, it was construction crews, framing lumber, the rumble of trucks carrying trusses. It felt surreal, watching houses rise on land I still paid taxes on. Every nail they drove was like a signature I hadn't given. Friends told me to shut it down immediately, to call the police, file a trespass order, take them to court before they built another inch. But something in me hesitated. I wanted to understand how deep the mistake ran. Who else was tied into this? The HOA, the developers, the city. If I stopped them too early, they might find a way to fix their paperwork behind closed doors. So I decided to watch, to document, to let them build. Each weekend, I drove out and took photos, dates stamped on every picture, showing every stage from empty ground to roof lines. 96 homes, rising one by one like teeth in the earth. Families started visiting the show homes. Children ran through half-finished driveways, and salespeople handed out flyers under tents. I said nothing publicly, but I was building my own case. My neighbors thought I'd lost my mind. "They're stealing your land," one of them said. "Why are you letting them finish?" "Because," I told him, "you can't show theft until the thief finishes carrying everything out the door." By winter, the subdivision was complete. Roads were paved, mailboxes installed, and the Willow Creek HOA held its first meeting in the new clubhouse, built squarely on what had once been my father's pasture. And then came the day of reckoning. The county tax bill arrived, still addressed to me, still listing every acre. Not a single record had been legally transferred. The developer had built 96 homes on property they didn't own. That was when I hired a lawyer. He was an old-school attorney named Richards, quiet but sharp as barbed wire. When I showed him the paperwork, he whistled low. They built all that without a clean title. Looks that way. He tapped the deed with his pen. Then you're sitting on the most expensive mistake in this county's history. We spent months preparing the case, pulling records, tracking signatures, proving the developer's so-called deed was invalid. Turned out they'd purchased an adjacent parcel but filed the wrong plat. There, Phase 3, map overlapped mine by nearly half a mile. Somewhere in their office, a clerk had copied the wrong boundary lines, and nobody double-checked before construction. 96 houses later, the mistake had a heartbeat, a mortgage, and an HOA board. I told Richards, I don't want to ruin families, but I'm not giving up what's mine. He nodded. We'll let the court handle that. But first, we make sure everyone knows the truth. So we filed the lawsuit. And that's when the quiet land my father left me became the loudest story in the county.